Okay. We will be live in a few seconds. Okay, we are live. And we are live on YouTube. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to session 4 of the summer series for parents on Generation Z, sponsored by Jacob's Ladder Therapies. Just to give you some more information, Jacob's Ladder Therapies provides individual, family, and couples therapy to teens, tweens, young adults, parents, and recently veterans suffering from anxiety, depression, mood and personality disorders, and family issues, including marital distress, communication problems, separation, divorce, life transitions, and substance use. We are a diverse group of clinicians, and we are able to deliver services in English, Spanish, Mandarin, and Taiwanese. You can view all of our clinicians and their bios on our website at www.jacobsladdertherapies.com. We are also passionate about providing free and informative sessions to the community. Today, we have a special treat in being able to share one of our fabulous clinicians with you. Maritza Noriega is a licensed marriage and family therapist with extensive experience providing mental health services to individuals, children, adolescents, and families. She has experience using different therapeutic modalities such as cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy to treat anxiety, depression, and trauma. She specializes in working with culturally diverse populations and is fluently bilingual in Spanish. She's passionate about helping others and is committed to supporting, encouraging, and guiding individuals in addressing their mental health needs. As a reminder, this session is strictly informative and should not take the place of therapeutic services by a licensed professional. If you or your family has experienced a medical or psychiatric emergency, please call 911 or go to your nearest emergency room. If you feel your family member could benefit from therapeutic services, please contact us right away. We provide free assessments daily to help determine the right level of care, even if it's not with us. I will put the link to self-schedule an assessment in the comment section, whichever form you're watching us on today. Today, we will be discussing how to know if your teen is depressed or just a normal teen. We are delighted to have an audience of parents and caregivers joining us via Zoom, Facebook Live, and YouTube Live. Please post in the comment section and we will address any questions at the end of session. If you miss any parts of this or want to recap, you can visit Jacob's Ladder Facebook page or our YouTube channel. And I will post in the comment section those links as well. For access to our clinicians post-session, consider joining Coffee Grind, which is our private Facebook group for parents and caregivers. All attendees of this session, or any session, get a free lifetime membership with code Summer Series. And I will also post that link in the comment section as well. So without further ado, please welcome Maritza Noriega.
Thank you, Tamitra, and thank you to everybody who is joining us. I'm very excited to be here with you all today. So as Tamitra mentioned, I'm going to be talking about depression in teens and what are some of the typical behaviors that we see in teens, as well as what are some of maybe signs and symptoms of depression, and what are some signs that we should be looking out for, and how we can better support teenagers who may be struggling with depression. So I'll start off by talking about the adolescent development. What are some of the changes that occur during this time? And then we will talk about typical teen behavior, signs and symptoms of depression, what are some causes of depression in teenagers, and how we can support teenagers who may be struggling with depression. So let's start off with the adolescent development. The adolescent development is the transition between childhood and adulthood. During this period of time, teenagers are searching for their identity, and they're also looking for independence. So they're seeking to become their own person. Many changes occur during this developmental period that can include physical, cognitive, emotional, and social changes. So when we talk about the physical changes, this is what people mostly are familiar with when it comes to adolescent development. And this is when teenagers' bodies begin to change. They have the growth spurt, they're reaching sexual maturity, their bodies are changing, whether it's height, weight, all different aspects of their bodies are changing. And this is what the physical changes are associated with in terms of the adolescent development. When we talk about the cognitive changes that occur during adolescent development, during childhood, children are typical concrete thinkers. When they transition to adolescent or teenage years, what happens here is that they become abstract thinkers. Their thinking completely changes, and they begin to look at different possibilities of things. They start to form new opinions. They start to ask questions. They have the ability to debate and are open to different ideas and opinions. They also become aware of thinking. So they're able to think about the thought process more, and they're able to kind of reflect on their own thinking and what happens for them. Another thing that happens during this time is because teenagers, their way of thinking is changing, what happens is that they begin to form their own thoughts and views on many topics, and they begin to extensively analyze or question things extensively, oftentimes pushing against authority or pushing against society standards, which were typical for them to follow during childhood. Teenagers also during this time, some of the cognitive changes that we see is that they begin to look at long-term, and they maybe start to think about the future. Where in childhood, it's more of the here and now, the present. When we talk about the emotional changes that occur during the adolescent period, is that we see that this is in relation to the hormonal changes. So there's a lot of changes that are happening for teenagers, and hormones is one of them. And what this causes is that the teenager's mood completely shifts or changes, and that their emotional responses are heightened because of the hormones. So they are learning new emotions, they are experiencing new emotions in different intensities. So this is what we see in terms of the development of emotions in teenagers during this period of time. As far as the social component or the changes that we see during adolescent development, is that teenagers start to focus a lot on their social circle. So at this period of time, their focus is mostly on their peers, their friends, making new connections, wanting to spend more time with peers, and not spending so much time with family as they used to during childhood. We also notice that teenagers start to seek to fit in more with their social group. There's the peer pressure that occurs during this period of time, and they're seeking new experiences. So they're doing things that they may not have done in the past. They're trying new things, and this can be, again, be in relation to wanting to fit in or just to explore and become independent and seek their identity. I'll be showing a video that kind of encompasses all of the different changes that occur during adolescence. And then after that, we can talk a little bit more about what are some of the typical behaviors that we should be seeing in our teenagers.
Being a teen can be an amazing time of discovery, learning, and friendship, but it's also a time of rapid change and emotional highs and lows where things can feel really tough. So, what's going on in our brains and bodies that make us feel this way? Why is being a teen so hard? We're often told that the most important years of brain development are between 0 and 5 years old, although recent research has found adolescent development to be equally important. During childhood, our brains continually grow, generating gray matter until they reach their maximum size, which for girls is around age 12 and boys around age 14. But even after this, the brain works to become more efficient by cutting away unused gray matter that isn't exercised by experience, and at the same time increasing myelin, which is fatty tissue that insulates brain pathways. Puberty begins in the hypothalamus, where a protein called kisspeptin is produced, triggering the pituitary gland to unleash the hormones testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. These activate the ovaries and testes, but also cause you to seek emotionally charged experiences, whether it's a movie to make you sob or driving 180 kilometers per hour down the freeway. It causes your response to emotionally loaded images or sounds to be more intense, which is why listening to One Direction may produce large bouts of the feels. The area of the brain responsible for planning ahead and assessing risk is still immature in teenagers, which is why teens are more likely to participate in high-risk behavior like unprotected sex and drinking and driving. Interestingly, in a simulated driving experience, adults and teens took the same amount of driving risks while alone. However, when surrounded by an audience of friends, teens took significantly more risks while adults were unaffected. What's the benefit of this behavior? Peer acceptance. In a study where teens were asked to rank music clips with and without knowing what their peers had picked, their choices changed. Unlike small children and adults, feeling socially isolated as a teen creates feelings of intense unworthiness. This, along with our biology, can contribute to teens prioritizing friends over even family. As social animals, stepping outside the safety of our family creates genetically diverse populations, diminishing the likeliness of inbreeding. In fact, teens have heightened social abilities like processing and evaluating facial expressions better than other age groups, allowing teens to be extremely cognizant of friends' joy, sadness, or stress. Speaking of stress, the hormone released in stressful situations to help soothe the brain cells of children and adults has the opposite impact on teens, causing an increase in anxiety. Pair that with a change in circadian rhythms, making you want to wake up 3 to 4 hours later than adults. It's no wonder some people describe teens as emotionally moody. On the other hand, teens are very physically healthy. The immune system is highly functioning, teens have increased tolerance to temperature changes and a high resistance to cancer. But despite physical fitness, records show that death rates increase by 200 to 300% after childhood due to motor vehicle accidents, homicide, and suicide. Scientists believe that many changes in white matter, gray matter, and connections in the brain may be to blame, with an increased risk of errors during this time. But with a greater number of synaptic connections and increased plasticity, the teenage brain is primed to learn quickly and memorize content fast. Unlike an older brain rooted in what it knows, teens can respond easily to their environment and make incredible strides in communication and socialization. Not to mention, being passionate is incredibly valuable, and taking risks is often what is needed to make changes in your life and the lives of others. Being a teen can be tough, but it can also be amazing. If you want to know why teens are the biggest super fans and become obsessed with their favorite bands and shows, check out our latest ASAP Thought on the science of fandom. Links are in the description to see that video. And subscribe for more weekly science videos.
So as the video mentioned, and as I had mentioned in my previous slide, there's a lot of changes that occur in teenagers that affects them, their way of thinking, their emotions, their social aspects. And let's talk about what are some of the typical teen behaviors. What are some things that are considered normal and that we'll be seeing in our teenagers during this adolescent development? And let's start off with talking about the mood swings. Teenagers will be moodier during this developmental stage. And usually that's associated to the hormonal changes that are occurring at this time. So hormones affect the production of serotonin and dopamine in the brain, which cause frequent mood changes. And also you might see that your teenager is experiencing intense emotions and that they're changing from one moment to the next. And this is completely normal during this period of time. Remembering that the adolescence period is a period of change and transition, and teenagers are trying to work through and try to navigate the new emotions that are coming up for them, their thoughts and their feelings, and how to work with that. So it will be typical for a teenager to have some mood swings during this period of time and experience emotions a little bit more intense than they may have in the past or may have had during their childhood. The other thing that we see happening in teenagers, and that's very typical of the adolescent development, is defiance or rebellion. This usually scares a lot of parents or caregivers or other adults, because now we're seeing teenagers push back and push against norms or household rules or things that used to be implemented. And the reason for this is that, remember, teens during this time are trying to find their independence. They're trying to become more independent. So they're going to be pushing against boundaries and rules. And this may cause a lot of conflict at home. It might cause some conflict at school. And we may see teens being a little bit more defiant than they were in the past, or trying to question more, push more back on rules that were implemented or have been implemented for a period of time. With that, we also see some substance use and experimentation. And the reason for this is that it's very common I know it's scary to think about teenagers using drugs and alcohol and experimenting with sexual behavior. But during this period of time, adolescent development, we'll see that teenagers start doing this. One of the reasons is that because they are wanting to fit in with the social circle. So there is more of that pressure to fit in with peers and classmates and fit in with the friend group. So that's why they may start experimenting with substance use and alcohol. Sometimes we also see that they will start experimenting with sexual behavior because their bodies are changing, they are developing, there are these changes that are occurring for them. And then it's also important to note that during this, the brain is changing during the adolescent period. However, teenagers still have a low impulse control. So they may engage in substance use and experimentation without being able to fully think about the consequences before making the decision. So it is typical to see teenagers engage in substance use and experiment with substances or sexual behavior during the adolescent development. Teenagers also typically tend to, or for the most part, some teenagers during this adolescent development will also start to lie, or you'll notice that they're withholding information. And again, teenagers during this transition are seeking their independence and they're trying to find their own identity. So a lot of the times the lying or the withholding information is because they want to make their own decision without input from parents or from adults. So they're trying to find their own voice and go on their own thoughts and their own feelings to make these decisions. So that's why they typically will tend to withhold information or lie. And then they also want privacy. So because of all the changes that they are going through, because they are seeking that identity, some of the lying and the withholding is associated to the privacy. They want to feel like they're independent or seeking that independence that they're looking for. Wanting to spend more time with peers and less time with family, this is associated again to the social circle. You know, now their focus is more on friends. So you'll notice that they're very influenced by peers or by friends, that they're constantly worried about what my friends are doing, what my friends are saying, what is going on with school and classmates and peers. And the reason why they're spending less time with families is because their focus is now on the social aspect of their life, wanting to fit in, wanting to feel like they can connect with other teenagers their age, and also trying to find out their identity. Who do I want to spend time with? Who do I feel like I can connect with? So spending more time with peers and less time with friends is associated to the connection of wanting to be independent and trying to explore a little bit more of their identity. And typically what we'll see in teenagers as well is a need for more sleep or an increased appetite. Again, their bodies are changing. So with this, we'll often see that teenagers are growing, they're having growth spurts. So we'll see that teenagers are typically eating more and sleeping more. There's also a change that happens in their internal clock. So now compared to adulthood and childhood, the internal clock within a teenager requires or pushes for sleeping at a later time and waking up at a later time. So this is why we see the change in their sleeping habits. They'll be going to bed later and waking up later. Also, you'll notice that sometimes teenagers will want to take naps during the day, or they can easily take a nap during the day. Sometimes that's also associated with the changes that come with adolescence, their development during this period of time. And we'll notice that teenagers typically during this period of time as well are more concerned about their physical appearance. So they're more aware of what their bodies look like. They're more aware of what they're wearing. This is in relation to, again, their bodies are changing. So there's a lot of different changes happening there, and that makes them a little bit more aware and more sensitive. But it's also feeling the pressure of wanting to fit in with peers or comparing themselves to peers, and what might my peer look like, how might their body be developing in comparison to mine. And we also, during this period of time, teenagers also become aware of the opposite sex. So this is why there's the big push, or a little bit more of concern about their physical appearance. Compared to childhood, they weren't as aware of the opposite sex. And now that they're in this adolescent development, they definitely do become more aware of the opposite sex. And we notice that this typically tends to lead to more concern about their physical appearance and what they might look like or what they might wear. So these are typically some of the behaviors that we see in teenagers, some of the things that we consider normal teenage behavior. And now let's talk a little bit about what are some of the warning signs, or what are some of the signs and symptoms that might tell us that our teenager is depressed. So what are some of the things that may be out of the norm or that are different and that we should be keeping an eye on or be more alert of? So one of the things that we'll notice or one of the signs and symptoms of depression is the constant feeling of sadness, a feeling of emptiness or numbness, worthlessness or hopelessness. And when we say constant, remember that earlier I had said that teenagers will typically go through mood swings. So we'll notice intense emotions, and we'll notice one emotion is changing from the other, from one to the next instantly or quite frequently. With depression, what we notice is that the sadness or the feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness are constant. They continue to stay there for a period of time. They're not going away as quickly as other emotions might. So this is definitely something that adults, caregivers, parents should keep an eye on if they are seeing that their teenagers are having these constant feelings of sadness or hopelessness, feeling a sense of empty or numbness. I don't feel anything. I'm just feeling a sense of apathy. This is definitely a warning sign or a symptom of depression. We can also talk about teenagers typically will experience a loss of interest or pleasure in activities or hobbies. So let's say your teenager was very into sports or music or art, and now you're noticing that that isn't even interesting to them anymore. They no longer have the pleasure, or sorry, the ability to want to do this. They don't experience pleasure from doing it. That can be a sign of depression. The teenager is no longer interested in the things that used to give them pleasure. It's not to say that their interests can't change over time or their hobbies can't change over time. It's definitely highlighting the fact that they have lost the interest or the pleasure in things that they used to enjoy, or for that matter of fact, anything. So it's not like anything is causing them pleasure or interest, or they're not willing to do or able to do these things that will give them that satisfaction that maybe gave it to them in the past with other things that they were doing, or things that they can explore or find in the future. We'll also notice that teenagers will start withdrawing and isolating. Again, remembering that during this period of time, adolescents and their social circle is highly important in their life. They really want to be connected with peers, whether that's face-to-face, through social media, text message. They want that connection with their peers and their friends. Once we notice that the teenager starts to withdraw and isolate and is no longer wanting to spend time with friends or communicating with them, and is spending a lot of time maybe in their bedroom alone, this can definitely be a sign and a symptom. It can also mean isolating and withdrawing from family. So they're not going to want to spend a lot of time with family during this period of time. However, it can be maybe like not even wanting to have dinner with the family anymore. Or if you guys do go out as a gathering, the teenager will separate themselves and will want to isolate in that situation. So noticing that the teenager is withdrawing or isolating more and not communicating much, whether it's with peers or friends or with family as well. And we'll also notice significant changes in their eating and sleeping habits. So I had mentioned earlier that we typically will see teenagers eating more, an increase in their appetite and an increase in their sleep because of the changes that they're going through, the physical changes that their bodies are going through, the growth spurt. However, when we should be concerned about this, or when it should be come to our attention more, is when we're noticing that the teenager is spending maybe a lot of time sleeping. So it's not your typical sleeping cycle, and they're spending a lot of time sleeping. It can also be insomnia, where they're saying that they're having a very hard time sleeping throughout the night or having a hard time falling asleep. It can also be associated to frequently waking up throughout the night. So just noticing overall changes in their sleeping habits, whether it's sleeping too much, way too much compared to another teenager, or it's sleeping less. It's having difficulty falling asleep or frequently waking up throughout the night. These are things that we should be looking at, or that can tell us that maybe our teenager may be struggling with depression. In terms of eating habits, like I said, for the most part, our teenagers will have an increased appetite because their bodies are growing, they're changing. However, if you notice that your teenager is eating more than usual, spending maybe less time eating, that can also be a red flag for us, or something that we should be looking out for. If you notice that your teenager has gained a lot of weight within a short period of time, or if you've noticed that they're losing a lot of weight, those can also be signs and symptoms of depression, that your teenager may be struggling with something as well. And then we can talk about the irritability. So I had mentioned earlier that teenagers will typically be moodier. They will have these mood swings. When we talk about the irritability, though, we talk about the irritability being constant. They seem to easily be triggered. They have a low frustration tolerance. This seems to be their mood or their baseline all the time. That can definitely be a symptom of depression. Typically, when we think about depression, as adults, we typically think about the tearfulness, the sadness. However, in teenagers, it's typically associated with their irritability. Teenagers are typically more irritable when they're struggling with depression. So this is something to look out for. If you notice that, hey, my teenager seems to always be irritable, or anything I say or anything I do quickly triggers him or her, they have a low frustration tolerance, this can be a symptom of depression. We can also notice that teenagers will have difficulty concentrating. What this might mean is that they have difficulty completing the schoolwork. They seem that they can't focus much, or not as much as they used to in the past. You can also see the difficulty concentrating if you're having a conversation with them and they seem very spacey, or they seem to need constant prompting or redirecting. Or we can also see difficulty concentrating within the classroom setting. It's a struggle for them to stay present. This can be a symptom of depression, where you're noticing, hey, my teenager's attention span or his ability to concentrate is not like it used to be, or he or she may be reporting that they can't complete the schoolwork, that they can't stay present or engaged in class, that they're having a hard time following along. Or like I said, if they're having a hard time following along in a conversation that you're having with them, or that you notice in their ability to concentrate on other things, that can be a sign of depression. When we talk about tearfulness or frequent crying, it's noticing that your teenager is often very tearful. And again, I want to bring it back to when I said that it was a constant feelings of sadness. This would be the same thing with the tearfulness or the frequent crying. It's when you're noticing that my teenager is spending a lot of time crying, or they easily start crying, or I'm having a conversation with them and they become really tearful. It's happening more so frequently than your typical mood swing. So the teenager will be very tearful in situations, whether it's at school, at home, in conversations, and you'll notice that it's very hard for them to engage in activities or do things that they used to without becoming tearful. We'll also notice with teenagers who are struggling with depression, there's a loss of energy. So a lot of times parents will typically say, or adults or caregivers will often say, like, oh, they're lazy, or oh, they can't get this done, or they can't get that done. And it's because when a teenager is struggling with depression, there is a huge loss of energy. So the things that seem very typical for a teenager to be able to accomplish, like going to school, getting dressed, getting out of bed, it's a lot of energy for them to do if they're struggling with depression. They don't have the capacity, and they feel extremely fatigued, or they feel that loss of energy. So So you might notice that my teenager can't even get out of bed in the mornings. My teenager doesn't even shower anymore. That with it, or change their clothes, or can't go through a full day of school. They get really tired if they do that. They say they don't have the energy. That can clearly be a sign or a symptom of depression, and let us know that your teenager is not able to cope with their role or the functions that they used to do previously. We'll also notice an academic decline or a change in the performance. So you might notice that your teenager's grades start to slip, or that they start to maybe skip class a little bit, or that they say, I don't have the motivation to complete the schoolwork, I don't have the energy to do this. That can be a sign that the teenager is struggling with depression, that they're not able to perform at the level that they used to. This can be in connection to the difficulty concentrating. So if they're having a hard time concentrating, if they're having a hard time doing the things that they typically do on a day-to-day basis, we will definitely see how this can impact their academic performance or change the academic performance. So maybe you won't notice that the grades are slipping, but maybe you'll notice that they're not doing their homework, or that they're maybe leaving school early and not able to complete the full school day. Or you'll maybe be getting a call from a teacher saying, hey, so-and-so fell asleep today during class. So you'll notice that there's some changes happening academically with your teenager if they are struggling with depression. This can be something that can give us awareness or help us understand what might be going on with them. The other thing that we'll see is suicidal ideation. So a teenager who's struggling with depression will sometimes experience that suicidal ideation, and this can be things like making comments like, I'd rather be dead, or if I weren't alive, if I weren't here, this would be better. Things like that should be taken very seriously. It can also be things like teenagers maybe talking about death more, or maybe talking about ways of suicide or ways of death. This, for adults and caregivers and parents, this should be immediately a red flag should raise for you. And this isn't something that teenagers are just throwing out there to get attention or to spite you. It should be taken very seriously, and professional help should be incorporated right away. So this could be like taking them to the nearest emergency room or calling 911, because if a teenager is expressing suicidal ideation or is making statements like this, like I said, it's not like they're saying it to get attention or to spite you or to just raise the conversation. It's because they're considering it or have considered it, and their safety is our number one priority and should be the number one priority. So seeking professional help immediately is the best course of action if your teenager is expressing these things. With that is also self-harm. So self-harm is actually something that should also be taken very seriously. When we talk about self-harm, teenagers sometimes will typically self-harm with sharps. It can be things like razors, safety pins, knives, and they can hurt themselves or cut themselves on their arms, on their wrists, on their thighs, anywhere on the body. Self-harm can also be in the form of pulling their hair, biting themselves. There's different forms of self-harm. So self-harm, like suicidal ideation, should also be taken very seriously, and professional help should be given right away. So if your teen is suicidal or is engaging in self-harm or both, you should immediately contact professional help. So taking them to the nearest emergency room or calling 911 immediately. With depression in teenagers, we will also see the substance use. So with substance use, what we'll typically see is that teenagers will turn to drugs and alcohol as a way to cope with their emotions or as a coping mechanism. So maybe you're noticing that your teenager is engaging in more substance use, more than and when I say more, it's because I had mentioned earlier that teenagers will typically experiment with drugs and alcohol during this phase, during the adolescent development. When we start to get really concerned about this is when it's more than just experimentation, when it's now come to a point where your teenager is using substances, alcohol, and drugs to cope. So they're using that as a coping mechanism. These can be definitely be a sign for us that your teenager or that the teenager is struggling with depression. So keeping, being aware of what is my teenager using, when is it experimentation versus when is it becoming frequently or a habit. That can definitely be a clear indicator for us, or a sign that will help us determine whether our teenager may or may not be struggling with depression. So these these highlighted, or the bullet points, kind of emphasize some of the things that we look for when we determine whether a teenager is struggling with depression or not. Not all of these bullet points have to be present in order for a teenager to be struggling with depression. It can be maybe just the tearfulness and the loss of energy and the urges to self-harm. Any of these, if they're for an extended period of time or for a period of time, a couple of months, let's say 2 to 3 months, your teenager has consistently shown these behaviors, or you're becoming more aware of them, that can be a clear indicator that your teenager may be struggling with depression, and that he or she may need more support at this point. Let's talk about what are some of the causes of depression. So when we talk about the causes of depression, we look at the biological and the environmental. So if we look at the biological side of this, we look at the genetics. So what this means is that depression can run in families. This doesn't necessarily mean that because there's a history of depression in the family that your teenager will be depressed. It highlights more that these traits can be passed down from generation to generation. So there is some genetic component that can be a contributor to the cause of depression in teenagers. We also look at the brain biology and chemistry. This focuses on the emotional vulnerability. So the first summer series session focused on, or talked a little bit about the biosocial theory, which if you didn't have the opportunity to watch, you can go back and watch. And I'm going to briefly touch on it today, but it can give us a little bit more insight onto why our teenagers may be experiencing emotions differently, or what might make them more vulnerable to certain things. So if we talk about the brain biology and chemistry, we talk about emotional vulnerability. And what this means is that some teenagers have higher stimuli to emotions. So they're more sensitive to emotions, or they're have a higher reactivity to these emotions. This also means that they have a slower return to baseline. So it takes them longer to calm down, or to come down from an emotion compared to somebody who isn't emotionally vulnerable. So emotional vulnerability definitely highlights the fact that some teenagers have higher stimuli to emotions, and that they have maybe more extreme reactions, and that they have a slower return to baseline. So it's going to take them longer or more time to calm down from that emotion compared to somebody who isn't emotionally vulnerable. So biologically, the genetics and the brain biology and chemistry, or the emotional vulnerability, can contribute to depression in teenagers. If we look at the environmental, we're looking at traumatic life events, stressful environment, and invalidating environment. So traumatic life events, what this means is that trauma is any situation or any event that takes place which has a lasting effect on an individual. It can be things like sexual abuse, witnessing a crime within the community. It can be domestic violence. It can be bullying. It's any situation or event that a teenager, or an individual for that matter, goes through that has these lasting effects on them. Things like this can contribute to depression in a teenager. It can cause some of the symptoms that I highlighted in the slide earlier. And that can be some of the reasons why your teenager or a teenager can be struggling with depression. If we look at the stressful environment, what we mean by this, stressful environment can be in the home, at school, or it can be home and school. Both of these environments can be stressful for the teenager. And what we look at for this is that usually there is a lot going on in these environments, or in these places for the teenager. It can be feeling pressure or expectations. It can also be things like financial challenges that may be occurring in the home, or maybe the teenager is helping care for or helping raise younger siblings while parents are at home. or maybe, or sorry, at school, at work, or maybe it's that the teenager is on a scholarship at school, so he's expected to perform at a certain level in order to maintain eligibility or status. So the stressful environment can be both at home, at school, or in one environment where the teenager is feeling the stress. And this can definitely be contributing to depression that a teenager may be experiencing. When we talk about the invalidating environment, so validation is awareness of an emotional response. It's not only awareness, but it's also being able to understand the emotional response. Although you may not agree with it, it's just being able to acknowledge it. An invalidating environment is the opposite of that. So for example, when a parent or a caregiver makes a statement that negates the teenager's emotions, this can be an invalidating environment that negates their emotions or their response. For example, you're overreacting, you don't need to be that sad. Or it can also mean when a parent, a caregiver, or an adult jumps to what we call oversimplifying, where they easily want to jump into problem solving. They want to help the teenager overcome that challenge right away. This can definitely result in an invalidating environment. So causes for depression can be the biological and the environmental components, and sometimes it's a mixture of both that can definitely contribute to why some of our teenagers may be experiencing depression. The last slide that we'll be talking about is how do I help my teen? So if my teenager, if you notice that your teenager is experiencing some of these symptoms and signs of depression, let's talk about how we can help them. The first thing is to have open communication. And what we mean by that is to be able to bring up your concerns to your teenager in a loving and non-judgmental way. So being able to say, hey, I'm concerned because I'm noticing this X, Y, and Z, and holding back that judgment of why can't you get up to school for school today and just go? You have it so easy. It's being able to say, I'm concerned about you, I'm worried about you because I'm noticing these things in you. Open communication is also about having a dialogue about mental health. So being able to openly communicate with your teenager about mental health, normalizing it a bit. There's a big stigma in society about mental health. So having that conversation with them will open up the dialogue and help normalize maybe some of the symptoms or some of the things that may be going on for them. We also talk about encourage supportive relationships. And what we mean by this is that as a parent, as a caregiver, expressing your availability and your support to your teenager. So letting them know that you can be there for them or that you're willing to be there for them and making yourself available for that. It's also encouraging your connect or reconnect with peers, friends, mentors, people who they can bring into their social circle who can be a good source of support for them. If they're not able to talk to you, if they don't feel comfortable talking to you, at least they have this social group or they have this social support from friends, peers, other family members who they can turn to seek support, who they can talk to about what might be going on for them. And then the last thing that you can do to help your teen who is struggling with depression is to seek professional help. As I highlighted earlier, if your teen is expressing suicidal ideation or is engaging in self-harm or is having the urges to self-harm, that's something that shouldn't be taken lightly and that you should immediately seek professional help, whether it's going to the emergency room or calling 911, but you can also seek professional help through school. So maybe you are concerned about your teenager and you're noticing some things. It can be reaching out to the school counselor and letting them know, hey, I'm noticing these things in my teenager. Can you help me? Or what can I do to support? It can be connecting with your son or daughter's primary doctor and letting them know, I'm concerned about my child. These are some of the things that I'm noticing. And obviously connecting with maybe a therapist or a psychiatrist who can also help you understand what might be going on for your teenager and help your teenager as well address some of the symptoms that might be coming up for them. So definitely reaching out to professional help and seeking that support from others who can help your teenager as well as help guide you and how you can better support your teenager or how you can support your teenager with what may be going on for them. So that is the end of my presentation. I am gonna look forward to hearing maybe some questions and answering some more. So go ahead and start sending those in.
So, Maritza, I've been collecting some of the questions from Facebook Live and also on YouTube. So there's a couple questions. One of them is, I think my kid is depressed only because their friends are. What should I do?
Good question. Okay. So like I said earlier, if your teenager is expressing some of these symptoms, particularly if it's suicidal ideation or self-harm urges, your teenager is not just going to say these things to get attention or to fit in with their friends or their peers. If you're noticing that your teenager is having other symptoms in addition that they may be expressing, then this could be a good indicator to you that something may be going on to them. Yes, teenagers will often be influenced by peers during this adolescent development. However, it's not necessarily meaning that they're not depressed or that they're just saying they're depressed because their friends are depressed.
Thank you. Another question. Will depression eventually just go away?
No, depression will eventually not go away. So with depression, it's really important to get help. Your teenager is not just going to experience this for 3 months and wake up one day and say, hey, I feel amazing, I'm good to go. It's kind of like I hate to say the word illness, but it is an illness. It's something that you have to treat. It's something that requires professional help. And it's kind of like a cold or a flu that if you don't take medication, not necessarily saying that you need to take medication for depression, but usually if you're experiencing an illness, you reach out to a doctor, you get medication, you get on whatever you need to take, you take care of your body. It's a lot of steps that you need to be done in order to heal and feel better. And that's the same thing with depression. It's not just going to go away. It's not just the phase that your teenager is going through.
Okay. Another question. Should I make my teen hang out with the family, even if they don't want to, because they're saying that they're depressed?
Good question. So teens will typically not want to spend time with family during this period of time. However, I think it's definitely, if they are depressed and they are isolating, withdrawing, I think it's important to try and encourage the teenager to spend some time with family and friends. So maybe it doesn't have to be every single day we have to sit together and have dinner. It can be something small and slowly start to incorporate having that face-to-face with family or that connection with family. But it is important for us to try and not have the teenagers isolate and withdraw, because this is what they're doing because they are depressed. So definitely encouraging it, but slowly as well, not just forcing it, because that may also backfire.
Okay. And what is too much sleep?
Too much. So typically I would say a teenager sleeps anywhere between 8 to 10 hours. Once we're hitting maybe like 11 to 13 hours, that is way too much sleep. We need to cut back on that. So I would say typically anywhere from 8 to 10 hours is what we would recommend. But anything over 12 to 13 and higher, I think is a lot.
Okay. And one viewer wanted to know, what's the difference between depression and anxiety?
Good question. There's a lot of different symptoms that may overlap or that can overlap in both. With anxiety, we see that there's more of an avoidance of doing things because of the reaction that they may have. So they may experience a rapid heartbeat or sweaty hands, or it's a lot about thinking about what other people might be thinking about me or how other people feel about me. Whereas depression, will notice sometimes they don't have the motivation or the ability to do it, or they don't want to do it. So that can be one of, and like I said, there's a lot of symptoms that may overlap, but that's typically what it might be related to, the avoidance versus the not able to, or no motivation or desire to want to do it.
Another question, if I think my teen needs therapy and they won't agree, what can I do?
So typically a lot of teenagers are maybe resistant or don't want to come into therapy. Maybe it takes a couple of tries and trying to find the right therapist that may fit with your teenager. I think it's important to encourage the teenager to seek professional help, having that conversation as to what can therapy do for you. This is how it can help you, normalizing it a bit, and like I said, finding the right fit. It's not like you go to one therapist and that's the only therapist you're allowed to see. It can be, and obviously you don't want to do a lot of shopping around, but it's maybe your teenager might feel, it's finding what your teenager might feel more comfortable with. Maybe they feel more comfortable with a male. Maybe they feel more comfortable with a female who speaks a second language. Maybe they feel comfortable in a group setting. It's trying to figure out what might be helpful for your teenager. What might they buy into?
Okay. Another viewer asked, I'm scared of initiating therapy for my teen because I'm afraid that I won't know what they'll say. And so what are some of the rules around confidentiality? And so I know that, and I can say just briefly, we will discuss that in the last session of the summer series. We'll go over more extensively the laws about confidentiality in treatment. But Maritza, if you just wanted to give kind of a brief, should the parent be scared? Will they get the information that their teen discusses in therapy?
Yeah, I definitely think that the parent has some right to feel a little bit hesitant as to what might come up if we do bring our teen to therapy. In order for the therapeutic relationship, so in order for your teenager to feel comfortable with their therapist, there has to be this trust that has to be built. And if the therapist is telling the parents everything that is going on in the session, then that's not helping build a therapeutic relationship or the alliance. We will disclose as therapists anytime there is a life-threatening behavior. And let's say anytime your teenager discloses that they're hurting themselves, they're thinking of hurting themselves, somebody has hurt them, those are things that we are mandated to report. And it's also that the therapist might have a conversation with the parent and the teen in when session starts and talk about what are some of the things that we can disclose to parents and what are some things that absolutely we don't disclose to parents. So it's having a dialogue, open dialogue and open communication, because essentially as a parent, you're there to support your teen. You want the best for them. So you definitely do want to be involved in the treatment, but it's trying to navigate how involved am I going to be and when do I maybe need to take a step back and let my teen navigate the therapeutic process on their own.
Great. Another question, how do you deal with a teen that may be depressed with social isolation due to COVID-19?
Ooh, great question. COVID has definitely changed a lot of things for our teenager, and we've noticed a lot of teenagers isolating, withdrawing, and there are a lot of limitations on what they can do right now during this pandemic. I think one of the other things that I highlighted earlier is that maybe they're not able to see people face to face right now, but they can still maintain that communication. So it's being creative and finding ways that your teenager can communicate with other peers or engage with other peers without necessarily having to see them face to face. Or if they are anxious and they have that social anxiety, it's easing them into the process slowly.
Great. Another question, if a teen has been diagnosed with depression and undergone treatment successfully, and are they more prone to experience recurrences of depression as an adult or young adults?
I think this would definitely, there is a possibility, and again, like I talked about earlier, what can cause depression in teens, and we talked about the biological and the environmental. These are things that are going to impact you as an adult as well. So it can definitely be, if it was related to biology, or if that was a component that was part of the reason why this teenager went or had depression and was receiving the treatment, that's something that's going to continue with them, right? If it was maybe related more to environment, and then they have learned coping skills and the environment is less stressful, then that can definitely cut back or reduce some of the risk of it happening in the future, happening again. So it's definitely going to be looking at the biological and the environmental, and that can definitely be an indicator of how the depression may be in the future, or if it does come up in the future.
The second part to that question was, do they need to continue to be mindful of symptoms of depression resurfacing as they grow older?
Absolutely. This is something that we should always be aware of, and that the parents or the individual should definitely keep in mind. When am I noticing that I am experiencing these symptoms again? When are they maybe being consistent or persistent? And when should we start to seek professional help again?
Great. I think that we hit all of the questions. I'm just searching again just to make sure I didn't miss any questions. Yeah, I think we got all the questions. So I want to thank Maritza for all of the knowledge and gems you dropped on us tonight. And we are especially thankful and grateful to have clinicians in the community willing to take time out to be real and tell us the truth, especially our Jacob's Ladder Therapies clinicians. So if you're interested in contacting Maritza for therapy for your teen, tween, or young adult, or for additional speaking engagements, you can actually email her at Maritza at jacobsladdertherapies.com. If you missed any parts of this or want to recap, you can view it on Jacob's Ladder Therapy Facebook or YouTube channel. And I've posted the links in the comment section, and I will post them again. If you feel you or your family member could benefit from therapeutic services, please contact us. We do provide free assessments daily to help determine the right level of care for you or your family member, even if it's not with us. And I have already put the link to self-schedule assessment in the comment section. And again, you can view all of our clinicians on our website at www.jacobsladdertherapies.com. Next week will be week 5, and we will be talking about your young adult. If you have a young adult who, what we call failure to launch, they either have gone to college and returned from college, or just don't have the motivation to move forward in life. We're going to talk about what that looks like and how to actually move them forward in life. So please tune in for that next Wednesday at 6:30. And to all of our viewers, we'd like to say thank you. Thank you to Maritza. And everybody, please stay safe and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.